about your grandfather.
My grandfather was named John Treadwell Nichols, and I am named for him. I am John Treadwell Nichols II, the second. My grandfather was the curator of recent fishes at the American Museum of Natural History from about 1918 to when he died. He died in 1958. He was a very tall, taciturn man who smoked a pipe all the time. He was described as being Lincoln-esque because he was so tall. He wore the same suit, a blue serge suit from Brooks Brothers, every day of his life. Every now and then he would have a new one made, but he always looked sort of rumpled, and he had pipe tobacco crumbs all over his sleeves. And he was a very respected naturalist. And all my connection to him when I was a kid was out in the world, in nature. He was a great ornithologist. I used to help him trap birds and band them. I was on Long Island, outside of New York City, called the William Floyd Estate, which was 600 acres of land. And it was nature paradise. Mm-hmm. When I was a kid, I would hunt for turtles for my grandfather. Me and my cousins, we'd just go out and go mm-hmm. all through the forests at Mastic looking for box turtles. And in 1960s, I remember finding several turtles at the Mastic Estate that had been marked by my dad when my dad was 6 years old in 1921 or 22, because turtles live a long time. And my father was the same way. My father, David Nichols, wanted to follow in the footsteps of John Treadwell Nichols. My father wanted to be a zoologist, a field zoologist. He did a lot of work for the American Museum of Natural History, collecting small mammals. My mother was Monique Robert, French woman, was very interested in anthropology. And my grandfather, John Treadwell Nichols, got my dad, David G. Nichols, a sinecure in the mammalogy department of the American Museum of Natural History. And henceforth, in 1937, the irresistible force met the immovable object, and my parents, Monique and David, got together. They met at the museum, and they worked together at the museum for several months while they were courting. Uh-huh. So that's, yes, the American Museum of Natural History is responsible for me, because that's where my father and my mother got together.
That's a great story.
Yeah. My life in music began when I was only knee-high to a kazoo. My mother was French, and during the first 2 years of my life, she sang me to sleep with a lovely lullaby called Fée Dodo. My mother died in 1942 when I was 2 years old, but later my French grandmother taught me the words to Fée Dodo, and I sang my own kids to sleep with that song almost until they were in their teens. It goes, Fée Dodo, Tanya, petite sœur, Fée Dodo, t'auras un gâteau. My father played the guitar with a great deal of vigor, and he often sang me to sleep when I was a kid with songs like The Blue-Tailed Fly, the Crawdad song, Frankie and Johnny. Sometimes he sang ponderous and exciting Russian songs to me, or French ballads that he learned from my mother before he died. In 1947, when we lived in Westbury, New York, and I was 7 years old, for Christmas I got a Tex Ritter record. I really loved that record. It had songs on it like Old Shep, and much later adapted the Elvis Presley version of Old Shep on my guitar, and I used it to seduce girls. It worked every time. You sing to teenage girls about your best pal, your dog named Old Shep, who finally gets so old that you have to put him out of his misery with your 6-gun, and Old Shep looks up at you with baleful eyes, saying he understands. And then the last lines of the song are, Old Shep is gone, where the good doggies go. No more on this earth will he roam. But if dogs have a heaven, there's one thing I know. Old Shep has a wonderful home.
Okay. In Taos, I came to Taos in 1969 The first day I arrived here, there were bullet holes in store windows. Things were boarded up. There was a hippie Chicano war going on. I remember I was driving around the plaza. I saw a kid that looked like he needed a ride. He said, I stopped my VW bus and picked him up, and he said, I'm going to the 5-Star Farm. And I drove him down to Llano Camado to the hot springs. And the next thing I know, I was floating around in the hot springs, totally naked with 35 or 40 freaks. And then they asked me to dinner, and they were all squatting around a big cauldron full of stew or something and eating it with their hands. And then they asked me to stay because they were having what amounted, as far as I could tell, a kind of communal fuckathon that night. And I was married and I had a kid, so I declined. I demurred. I remember fleeing from the 5-Star Farm down in Hot Springs. I was so grateful to hit the hay and the El Chico motor car for $2 a night. I met Dennis Hopper almost as soon as I got to Taos. And Dennis was a little deranged, and I remember he had a friend, Dean Stockwell, who was coming to town, and Dean was at that time with an actress named Toni Basil. Toni Basil, I think, plays one of the hookers in Easy Rider in the movie. And for some reason, they couldn't stay with Dennis, so they stayed in my house. Dean Stockwell and Toni Basil slept for 2 or 3 or 4 days on my kitchen floor in sleeping bags. And I remember for pillows that they had a garbage sack full of marijuana.
And we arrived in Taos and moved into the house. And the realtor handed me a deed and a couple of other papers. That was it. It was so easy, you know. The house had a roof that leaked like a sieve. It was a dirt roof, you know. It was totally incompetent. Had no septic system that functioned. It turned out you had to crap in the outhouse, you know. It was surrounded by snakes. It was just a broken down old adobe, yeah. And it was wonderful. I mean, it was just on the brink of total collapse. But it was so easy to just find it, move in, put the milk in the irrigation ditch because we couldn't afford a refrigerator, you know, and then just try and start learning how to take care of it and patch the roof and then do this and do that and learn how to irrigate the pasture and clean the ditch. And it was great for me because all my neighbors were Spanish speaking, you know. It was, so when I cleaned the ditch, I was the only gabacho on the ditch. But, you know, I could joke and listen to jokes and that. And half the meetings I went to were all conducted in Spanish. So I was in heaven, you know. It was just, I mean, I loved just the community, the attitude, the culture, all that kind of stuff. And then I got really politicized. I mean, I moved to Taos not to be part of a generation of alternate lifestyle people. I moved to Taos because I wanted to continue working within the movement, the anti-war movement, the Black Panther movement, the social equality and justice movement, the civil rights movement. And I had read an awful lot about New Mexico. You know, New Mexico at that point was and still is just about the poorest state in the Union, you know. It was, I figured, as close as I could come to a third world experience while still being in the United States. I'd read an awful lot about Reyes Tijerina and the Alianza and the land grant movement that had wound up in the raid on the Tierra Maria courthouse and that kind of stuff. I had introductions to Elizabeth Martinez, Petita Martinez, and people in Española who were putting out El Grito del Norte, a newspaper that was like a Alianza newspaper, Pinto newspaper, and stuff like that, you know, a Chicano movement paper. And immediately when I got to Taos, gravitated to going down there and helping them get out issues of the newspaper. I joined groups like Trabajadores de la Raza, which was in Taos agitating for basically, you know, Hispanic social, economic justice issues
So, big wheels turning in your life.
in my life.
You wrote the Milagro Beanfield War.
Yeah, I wrote the Milagro Beanfield War between 1972 and 1973. I had failed to publish a book now for about 7 or 8 years. I had been trying to write political novels, angry political novels, particularly anti-war novels, anti-Vietnam War during that period. And finally I said, I'm getting nowhere doing this, so I tried to kick back and reintroduce a sense of humor to my life, because I kind of lost my sense of humor a little bit, a lot. Sparsa had nothing except. So Milagro was a strange experience. I had been writing articles for a couple of years on the struggle to introduce a conservancy district and build a dam in the Taos area, and or defeat the conservancy district and the dam. And I had been working for a couple of years with a group called the Tres Rios Association, which was headed by a good friend of mine, Andres Martinez, and other guys whom I really loved, like Polito Valerio and Bernabe Chavez, J.J. Bernal, and these elderly guys who were real instrumental in sticking up for just the culture and the way of life in Taos. And they had a lot of courage, because they were essentially defeating a big dam and a lot of water. And it's hard to say no to water in northern New Mexico, you know. But they figured the cost would be totally prohibitive to most of the local population. So when the New Mexico Review died, ignominiously, in November of 1972, I said, okay, let's try another novel, you know. And so I blammed out the Milagro Beanfield War in about 5 or 6 weeks, and took about 3 or 4 weeks to retype the book, sent it to an agent in New York City, and the agent sold it. And which was the first book I'd sold in 8 years or something like that. And then the publisher they only gave me like about 8 or 9 months to rewrite the book. So there was a lot of people working to make that into a movie from the minute it went out on film option in 1973. And in 1979, I guess the producers who'd had it for 6 years, Christensen, Rosenberg, they gave up. They couldn't figure it out. And they'd had God knows how many studios funding the development every year. And they gave up, and at that point, the book had sort of become a cult book. So there was more interest, and when the option was given up, like Redford was interested, Cheech Marin was interested, a couple of other Hollywood people were interested, and this guy Moctezuma Esparza was interested. And all the other guys had money and power, and Moctezuma Esparza had nothing except, he was Chicano, he was Latino, he was Hispanic, he came from the hood. He spoke Spanish, he'd been in the movement, and so I figured it would be cool if he would, take the option. And the agent just said, "You're out of your mind, John. What are you talking about? You will make so much money with Robert Redford. You will make money with Cheech Marin. You will make money, And by that time in my life, the only thing I trusted was lack of money, So, long story short, I remember Redford came to Taos and could not believe that I would give him the option, right? So he went to Esparza and talked to Esparza, and Esparza said, "Oh my God, here's my stepping stone into the big time. So he signed a joint venture agreement with Redford. And for some reason, a really, really odd reason, Redford decided to make the movie. I do not understand why. I never understood the script, never seemed to be a really good script, and there was so much chaos and confusion around the whole process. And it had been going on for 14 years, 13 or 14 years by now. I always desperately wrote the stories, sort of trying to earn a living, but I never wrote the stories that you would gear up to write in order to deliberately earn a living. How I earned a living for, 20 years is working on films. When I first got to Taos, I guess I learned how to fish the little rivers. Pot Creek, Rio Chiquita, the Little Rio Grande, southeast of town. And I was obsessed by it. I mean, I just ran up those little rivers just on a daily basis, literally. And did that for about 10 years. And then I got obsessed by the Rio Grande River. First of all, I learned how to fish the Rio Grande.
My God! Look at that! Yipes! Wow. Look at that.
That's a big fish.
That is beautiful.
You got a snapshot of that? Or you have your
Yeah. Let me take this wait a minute, I can put it on photo and, okay, it's taken.
And then I got obsessed with the western mesas. And I spent years, just observing stock ponds, little puddles of water and the life cycles in stock ponds, taking pictures of them, and just wandering in the mesas and over by Tres Orejas. And when I turned 60, I went really crazy and started hiking above tree limit. I don't know what happened, because when I turned 60, I thought, okay, enough already with all the physical exercise and staying in shape and all that crap, because I had so many heart problems and stuff.
I have a prolapsed mitral valve and asthma. In case things get out of hand, there's an adrenaline needle always ready in my fridge. Never do I forget to carry a Ventolin inhaler. I get tachycardia attacks and bad atrial fib. When I have the tachycardia or AFib attacks, I perform the Valsalva maneuver. You squeeze yourself downward as if constipated and trying to move your bowels, and that stops your heart, then it restarts again in sinus rhythm. I drink a lot of Jack Daniels before my meals and wine with the meals and beer. I seem to have a great capacity. I'm used to my fucked up heart. I've been on and off of heart pills like Digitalis, Digoxin, Tenormin, Quinaglu, Verapamil, Carvedilol, Naloxone, Triamterene, and Lasix since I was 34. I sense that I'm indestructible, and I also sense that I might drop dead tomorrow, but who cares? C'est la vie, carry on.
And for some reason, the next obsession in my life became 12 to 13,000 feet. And
What do you see up there?
the botany is way different than the botany down here in the valley, alpine. I got really interested in bighorn sheep. They haven't been here so long, but they're very successful. So I became obsessed by bighorn sheep, and I always carried a spotting scope, and I read a lot of books, and became friends with a bighorn biologist in New Mexico, and took a lot of photographs, and the most fun in learning about bighorns was simply crawling around in their territory. The sky's the limit. Look, Mom, I published a real book. This book is my Inconvenient Truth.
Okay.
Al Gore did that movie, An Inconvenient Truth. This book is an environmental essay on what we're doing to the planet and what we ought to do to quit doing what we're doing to the planet. On one side of the page is a picture, and on the other side of the page is the text.
And the picture is just almost always sky and mesa, sky and mesa. And it's very, what do you call it, bucolic or whatever. And the text is just doomsday ecology, you know, up against the wall humanity or ecological devastation is going to get your mama. I don't know, they're so cornball, you know. I'm also the world's foremost photographer of stock ponds. I've taken more and better photographs of stock ponds than anyone else on earth. None of the books that I've published, none of them were ever written like to make money or how can I do the formula, how can I score. You know what I mean?
On my 1981 book tour, I fly to Seattle, Portland, the Bay Area again, Los Angeles, Phoenix, Tucson, Flagstaff, Denver, Boulder, Colorado Springs, Austin, Dallas, Chicago. Up high, I'm terrified of even modest turbulence. Once I grabbed the hand of a guy sitting next to me, and although startled, he let me hold his hand until the plane landed safely. I apologized profusely. He replied, "No problem."
I always desperately wrote the stories, sort of trying to earn a living, but how I earned a living for, 20 years is working on films.
You think the Milagro Beanfield War is the book that you're going to be the most remembered for?
No, I think it'll be Redford's movie. It's all Redford's thing, I'm simply a footnote on his coattails. I think once the movie came out, nobody ever read the book again. It's, I don't know. I hope not. But you should be grateful to be remembered for anything.
Rick Smith, Sean Murphy, and yours truly, Johnny Nichols, began Los Muchachos en la Biblioteca on Wednesday, January 10th, 2007 in the back of Brodsky Bookshop on the main drag of Taos, just a block south of Michael's Kitchen. And so far, we've never played a Bob Dylan, Neil Young, Van Morrison, Joni Mitchell, Emmylou Harris, or Billie Holiday song correctly. In fact, we've happily butchered all music that we played with untrammeled delight. We play everything in the key of X, but we've sure had a lot of fun. No practice allowed, no public performances, we swore, no spectators have ever witnessed our enthusiastic cacophonies. Right from the start, we promised never to perform.
We're going to kick it off with Mr. John Nichols.
Okay, let's kick it off. It's just a little something I picked up in England.